had made sprue glue before, many years ago. I mean, 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago. I had remember making this stuff before. Because the fillers back in the day, there wasn't near as many options, and the stuff that I was using, the typical tube fillers, the stuff was just so dry and crumbly, it was terrible. I never had any luck with it. And I had remembered reading about something, making glue, and back then I was using the tube glue and mixing it with chopped up pieces of sprue from various kits and whatnot, and it turned into a pretty goopy, stringy. I mean, it was as hard to work with as this stuff is, you know. And it was okay. It wasn't too bad, but you know, I kind of gave up on it pretty quick. And then probably 5 or 6 years ago, I remember trying to make a batch of it, and that time I did use some. I believe it might have been the testers. You had used some of this and some chopped up various sprue and stuff, and it was better. It turned out much better, but it didn't have a good sanding quality to it. It seemed kind of hard and just, I don't know. I used it on a couple kits and some stuff, and it just didn't seem to be much of an improvement over using the fillers that I could get, you know, at that time, about 4, 5, 6 years ago or whatever. It was just easier just to put some good filler on there and sand, and instead of trying to use this stuff. And then when I started thinking about this stuff, I thought, you know what if I play with that again? And I used, this time I had a Tamiya bottle of Tamiya glue that was just about empty, maybe a 1/4 inch left in it, and it was, you know, kind of cloudy and murky from contamination, and I had another bottle that I was anxious to break open, and I thought, hey, this would be ideal to make a little batch of sprue glue. But this time I actually thought I would try to use you know, some actual pure styrene and see if that would sand a little better, you know. And that was my thinking behind that. And so how I made this was, I took this bottle, I left about, you know, it had about that 1/4 inch of material left in it, and I chopped up some well, I just took the easiest way to do it, I found, is just to take a straight edge and just score some strips out of it, you know, maybe 1/4 inch or less apart. I guess you could make them smaller, and then you would come up with, you know, scored pieces. And then I just went back and did sort of, you know, checkerboard just made little square bits, just scored them, and did a whole little sheet of this stuff, and then just snapped it, and came up with a bunch of little pieces like that. And it takes, to start out with, I would say you would need just as much styrene as you do need glue. It takes more than you think. If you think you have enough, it probably takes a little more. So I'd say a 50-50 mix is a good starting point. And what you'll end up with is a big kind of a glob in there that's just slowly dissolving. And what I did was just take one of these stirring deals, and I would just go in there every so often and just kind of try to stir it up and get it homogenized. And you pretty much need to leave the stuff overnight. Once it's kind of stirred in there and everything's kind of covered and the pieces are incorporated into the glue and they're starting to melt down, best thing to do is just set it aside, leave it overnight, leave it for a day, whatever, and eventually it will turn into a real creamy consistency. And then the thickness is just up to what you want. You know, I was looking for something that's more of a filler. So I wanted something that was kind of thick, that wouldn't run, but did kind of level itself a bit. and you can go back and add more pieces into it. You can as it sits, it does eventually start to thicken. It takes time for it to thicken, but it will thicken over time. And then you can just take a pipette and add a little bit more glue into it. But I found this, to me, a combination with using the pure styrene is probably the best way to go on it. And you could use, I was going to use this, but I didn't want to bust it open. It was a fresh bottle at the time, and I just didn't feel like busting it open for this. Any liquid glue, I think, would work fine. Any of the liquid cements, But anyway, and that's how it looks. And as you can see, it but it's doesn't run. It's not real runny. And you can use it to glue stuff together, So I've got a couple pieces here that I found that are that aren't white, so I can show. But you can take a thin amount of it and just sort of, this is kind of a small piece here, but I'm going to take a little bit of this and go around the perimeter. And actually use it as a glue as well. I made this primarily for filling after I've put parts together, but it works great for assembling parts. Of course, I'm being a little quick here and getting it all over everything, but just to show an example, and you can see it, you can see it oozing on the seam there. Didn't do the best job, but anyway, this stuff sands just like the plastic. That was what I was looking for. Of course, this has been around since, gosh, forever. People have been making this stuff since at least the 60s, I'm sure, because I remember reading about it way back when. But it was almost more of a necessity back then because there really weren't any good fillers, aside from maybe some automotive stuff. But anyway, and it sands just like the plastic. And I think the key is using a good quality glue and using pure styrene. I think that's the big key. It's a super fine grain is what it results in, and it sands. Even if you leave it, you can leave it a couple days to get good and hard, and it doesn't take long. I mean, it dries about as quick as you would the glue. If you were just gluing the parts with Tamiya, obviously you wouldn't start sanding right away, and you'd give it a few hours at least, to cure up good. Well, it's the same when using the styrene bits in it. It still takes about the same amount of time to get to a sandable consistency. I try to leave stuff a little longer just to be sure, but you can see on this part here where I've used it, it's a smooth, baby butt smooth, but you can see the white, from where I used it to fill. In this case, I went in and filled. After I assembled the parts, I went in and filled, and then after it cured, came back and sanded, and it just sanded right down, no problem, real smooth. So I guess it's a matter of, this stuff does work. It's very useful. It's just a matter of getting the right stuff together, the right ingredients, to make it a good, useful product. And I've been using it more and more as I've been going here. Another tip, and I found this, I happened to be watching a video just, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago of Phil Flory, and he talked about making this. I guess he's trying to make his own brand, and he wouldn't tell his ingredients and all, but I noticed that he was using the styrene, so I knew then, hey, I'm on the right track, because I respect the guy immensely. And he posted a little extra tip that I didn't think of, and that's you can tint this stuff to different colors using just acrylic paint. So you can put drops of acrylic paint in here if you want a gray or a blue or green, if you primarily work, most models these days are like white and gray and all that, so I guess it would be helpful to tint this to, like, say, a blue or a red, or just put a little black in it and make it sort of a darker gray or whatever. So I haven't done that yet, but I mean, he showed doing it, so I know it is possible. So there you go. And then these are, you know, this is cheap. It's using products that you probably already have on hand. If you don't, I mean, the Tamiya bottle works great because the brush is nice and fine. So you can get most of it off and get into some really small, you know, joins with it. You could use a paintbrush, obviously. I don't know how you would clean it. It'd be a one-time use situation. If not, you could just take old paint jars and make you up a batch in there and use toothpicks or old brushes or whatever to apply it. Just make sure it does have a good seal and it still has its, you know, seal in it and everything, because obviously it's a highly evaporating glue. But anyway, I'd had several people ask about more about the Sprue glue, and I didn't think there was much more to say, but you know, I think it is important to mention that using the right ingredients does make for something that's actually good and useful. Using the chopped up Sprue just seemed to be unpredictable, and it always seemed to be harder to sand. The sanding qualities were just not as good, I don't think. Not near as well as this stuff has been working. It just works really nice. So anyway, there's an you know, an old trick brought back to modern times, you know, making Sprue glue.